Welcome to Closer Look, a podcast where our pastoral team at Charis City Church takes a deeper dive into the topics we're exploring together as a church. Join us as we unpack the truths of Scripture and consider how to apply them to our everyday lives. For more resources and information, visit us at chariscity.com. Welcome to Week 7 of Charis City's podcast called Closer Look, where each week we'll be diving deeper into Sunday's sermon. I'm your host, Adam Morgan, and I serve as our Creative and Connections pastor here. I'm joined by our lead pastor, Nathan Reimer, and Associate Pastor, Chris Hallback. This Sunday, we kicked off our Advent series where we're looking at weeks of Advent and their meaning. And this week, Nathan, you talked about hope in the Advent season, not this idea of wishful thinking, but the kind of hope that really anchors us. And speaking of anchor, you used this powerful image of anchoring a boat to floating debris versus the seabed. Can you kind of walk us through that illustration?
Yeah, it sounds less powerful when you say it that way. But,
that's fair.
When this powerful image of anchoring a boat to some debris.
Very powerful something.
I don't know.
I wasn't paying attention.
I don't exactly remember
I was on
what
stage.
it is. Yeah, that's right. I was asleep
once
during that part of the sermon. And no, it's this idea that, if you're out on a boat and the storm's coming up and you're getting ready to anchor your boat with an anchor to the floor of the lake or the seabed, and you see this big, branch or tree that looks pretty big, pretty stable, it's bigger than your boat, and you tie off to that thinking, well, that's, that'll anchor me and hold me still. But the problem is that log or that tree is affected by the same wind and waves that your boat is, and so you're still being pulled off course. And the point is, it gives the illusion of being anchored, but you're not really anchored. And so that kind of leads into this idea of what are we going to anchor our hope to?
Yeah, you talked about these things. I think you said Tim Keller, you got them from Tim Keller, these things that we try to anchor to, like comfort, control, approval, and power. So why do you think people are drawn to try to anchor to those things?
Well, what Tim Keller says is that they're source idols. And I agree with a lot of that. I think there's probably some flexibility in that thought process, but for the most part, what he would say is so many of our sins are really just symptoms of a deeper problem. And the problem is our connection or our worship of these source idols that you brought up. And so we may be affected by one of those, we may be affected by two or three, we may be affected by all four. And so what happens is when we have any sort of an idol, we begin to tie our hope and our peace and our joy to that rather than Jesus. And hope is such a big one because I really believe that what we tie our hope to or what we anchor our hope to really affects our peace and our joy and our love, all of those other things that we're going to be talking about for the next few weeks. It really does start with hope because our Christian relationship with Jesus starts with faith, and faith leads to hope, which then leads to all of those other things, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I don't think you can have peace, joy, love without hope. If you have no hope, what are we doing?
Yeah,
right.
I think that has to kind of quote you in your sermon, if that's not where we're anchored, I think everything else just falls apart because eventually something's going to tear you down. No matter how hard you try to find peace, no matter how hard you try to be joyful in every circumstance, no matter how hard you try to love people, including your enemies, man, if we don't have a hope for what's to come and a hope in who we worship, it's going to fall apart.
Right. And even as non-Christians, there's hope, right? I mean, You're putting hope in something. You're putting hope in family. You're putting hope in one of these idols, and that's all fine and good. It works until it doesn't, if that makes sense. Until these idols fail you, which they ultimately will. And I know we'll talk about that as we kind of get into the different idols that we try to anchor our hope to. But you can anchor your hope to something other than Jesus, and that works until that idol fails on you. And then your hope dies, and then obviously you're going to lose joy and peace and all those other things because you've lost a sense of hope.
So of these four things that you mentioned, I'm curious, that's comfort, control, approval, and power. Which of these do each of you, and I'll answer too, find most challenging personally for yourself?
Go ahead.
I would say probably control. I'm not somebody that feels the need in my life to have the 5-year plan and have everything mapped out for me, but I do pride myself a little bit, I kind of in my flesh, of being a very independent person. And so when you take away any of that independence, my natural response to it is kind of buck up to it. And so I generally seek control in anything I can. and so that's something that I have to work really hard to let go of. For me, I think that's probably the biggest one.
Yeah, I'm the same way. Control for me is by far the biggest one. I mean, I'm not saying I'm not affected by convenience, and I like to win. So power is a significant one for me. And then, like I said, approval can sneak up on me on occasion, but day in and day out, it's control. I mean, even down to, I got a little, OCD, I guess, in me, in that I don't like things to change. And it's all because I want to feel like I have control. I can get upset if I have a thought process of what my day looks like, and then it starts to change. That's frustrating to me because I've lost that sense of control. Then I get home and my kids or my dogs or whatever doesn't do exactly what I expect and think they're going to do. And all of that builds a level of frustration for me because I've lost the illusion of control. I really don't have control, but I've lost the illusion of control.
Yeah, and I'm sure you guys will both scoff at my answer is comfort. I like to be comfortable. I like to see. I can already hear you snickering, Chris. That's what knowing someone for 10 years will do. But yeah, I like to be comfortable. I like for things to kind of stay the same. I get into rhythms and habits, and when those change, I get very uncomfortable very quickly. And so, yeah, the thing that I think I tend to lean on is probably this false idol of comfort.
Well, and there's overlap. I mean, I can hear you and I are saying some of the same thing, and we're kind of attributing it to a different, but false idol. But comfort and control. If we want to control our comfort level, think about that in its most simple form. I want the temperature in my house what I want my temperature because I want to be comfortable. And if my wife starts playing with that, then she's affecting my control. And she's also affecting my comfort. So I think there's some overlap between those two.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, it's the tendency to and I know this will shock you somewhat, to sometimes my brain defaults to, I can do it better, so stop trying to do it. And I even see that, it's funny, you talk about, for you, this idea of like, I have the temperature where I want it, don't change it because I like it there. Like for me, it's down to even like, stop trying to drop the AC down a degree, because if you do that, you're going to jump our bill up $20. And I've been planning around this like $160 electric bill. And so what I think is best is for you to get over it and deal with it being at 70 and not 69 or 68, because I'm like, but that'll save us $20. And that's what matters to me, for me, it comes up even like at work. I mean, that's something I have to work really hard is to delegate. I don't like to delegate by nature. As somebody who has ADHD, that may shock you because you would probably think like he probably doesn't want to work. It's like, no, like the things that I do, I have a tendency to want to do them and not give them away because I'm like, if I give it to you, you're going to mess it up.
It's not going to be the way I want it.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
So how do we recognize when we are anchored to the wrong things?
Well, I mean, I think it really depends on what false idol you're looking at, because I do think it's a little different depending on which idol you're talking about. So we can talk, specifically about each one, but generally it's when things become more important than Jesus. And I'll give you a great example. So let's just start with comfort, since that was the first one that we talked about on Sunday. This idea of I'm only going to do certain things because I want to be comfortable. I'm not going to serve at church because getting up and getting there is hard enough, or I'm going to watch online, most weeks because it's easier. I'm not going to give. I'm not going to serve. All of these different things. Those are choices that we make for comfort. And so there we're making comfort an idol over Jesus. And that can happen with so many different areas. But the reality is, if you are not sacrificing some things for Jesus, you really have to question, is Jesus as important as you say he is? If you don't take time to pray, if you don't take time to read your Bible, if you don't take time to pray with people, serve, you've really got to question in that circumstance where convenience ranks compared to Jesus. And to me, that is a big one because I feel like Christianity ultimately is not a single decision. It is a life change. Yep. And so I really start to wonder and question what your thought process is when Jesus and the things of God get moved so far down on the comfort list. Does that make sense? So I'm not going to do this because it takes up too much time. I'm not going to do this because it costs too much money. I'm not going to do this because it makes me uncomfortable or gets me out of my comfort zone. Are you a follower of Jesus? And so to me, comfort is a big one to start on, because I think that is probably, for Americans generally, I think that is by far our biggest idol, is the idol of comfort, and includes safety, right? We talked about that on Sunday, but you've got safety is a part of that comfort, because you're uncomfortable when you're getting out of your comfort zone.
I think part of it is, like you said, it's not just a one-time decision. It's this idea of life change. So I think it's this, we have to actively, question, what am I putting in front of Jesus right now? What am I allowing to take first priority? And if it's my comfort level, if it's my having control, if it's, place idol here, then, that's time to evaluate. And also, even prayerfully asking, Lord, what am I, reveal to me the things that I'm putting in place of you, and letting you, reign supreme. So speaking of comfort, we probably live, I think you guys probably agree with this, we probably live in the most comfortable time in human history. How do you think that is affecting our faith and our understanding of hope?
Well, I think it is a threat to our faith, if you want to get right down to it, because I think we have, again, we've made comfort such an idol that I think a lot of people who would say I'm a Christian, I think are going to find out, unfortunately, at some point, that they're not really a Christian, because just claiming to be a Christian, and it does not make you a Christian. Being transformed by Jesus makes you a Christian. And so I just think, but I want to be careful. I don't want to say that, if you're questioning your comfort level and that you're not a Christian. We're all at different places, and I question that, and I have to reevaluate at different points in time. Obviously, being pastor of a church and not taking a salary, so I'm bivocational, that's not comfortable. I could have more comfort not preaching on Sundays and going wherever I want to go and doing whatever I want to do on weekends. But there are points where I find myself saying, and I've said this before, I wonder if, I could go to the beach on the weekends, and I could, go up to East Texas where I'm from, and I could do, and I have to remind myself that while comfort, it's alluring, it feels like a fun thing, and it can be, but it's not ultimately what we're called to. And so it's a constant evaluation, I think. So I don't want to say just because you go, oh, am I too worried about comfort? The fact that you're really questioning that and trying to balance it means you're probably a Christian. If you're hearing this and going, whatever, there's the people that there ought to be a check engine light if this were a car going ding ding ding.
I'm happy right, being comfortable. Don't mess with that.
Right.
Kind of thing.
I did whatever I did at 13. Yeah. I was at church camp and I made a decision, and now I just do whatever I do. If you hear this message, I almost looked at the camera because it feels like you're preaching all of a sudden. But if you hear this message and you go, oh, I need to think about that, I think that's probably a pretty good indication that you're a Christian. Now, you may still need to balance out and get the idol off the throne of your life. But if you hear the same talk and you go, whatever, I think that's really your check engine light ought to come on, because you clearly don't even have the desire to put Jesus first, much less to actually have the wherewithal to actually go about and do it.
Well, and I think because of the way our culture is, and because we're so convenience driven, it bleeds into our faith. And so we just assume that, and I talked about this, a couple of weeks ago in my sermon when we were talking about Change Me, was like, we want things to magically happen. And so we think that the second we become a Christian, life's magically going to get better. We're going to just all of a sudden stop sinning. And if we'll show up to church occasionally, maybe throw up a prayer or two and crack my Bible open, all of a sudden I'm going to live the exact way I'm supposed to. And then we get frustrated when we're I feel like I'm doing all the right things and nothing changes. And it's what are you doing? It's I prayed a prayer. It's okay, are you making any daily, conscious daily decisions to change? Are you trying to live obedient? It's well, every once in a while I think about doing good, but it's just hard. It's tough to find time in my schedule and all these, and it's but if we're going to answer the call to take up our cross, that's discomfort. I mean, it's death if we're being, really, really clear. But I think that's where we get caught up so often. I think for me, when I see comfort in America, I think of the convenient Christianity, and not just the convenient in like of the label, but of this idea that and some churches are bad about pushing it on people. It's like, well, if you just have faith, then God's just going to magically make you better. And it's like, yes, and he has. I mean, right. That's the whole point of the cross, is we are changed the minute we follow Jesus. But the rest of that from that point is a living sacrifice. And what that is going to look like is a conscious daily effort every single day to get better and to push ourselves. Because I think that's like you said, the thing that we're not really good at. We like being where we're at. And if we're really growing in our faith, I think we do constantly question and evaluate and go, where am I at, but where am I going? And I think that's a big question.
Yeah, I've heard you both talk about this, and I think I just heard you talking about this with somebody the other day, is our faith has us living in this constant tension between flesh and spirit. And so if, like you said, if we hear a message of truth from the gospel, then there should be this tension inside of us, this desire to want to continually change. But if we're complacent and we can just sit in it and go, oh, well, I'm doing, I'm comfortable, I'm good where I'm at. I think that's when, like you said, the check engine light should come on, and it's evaluation time. It's, have I really, am I really living as I'm called as a believer? Am I really living in that tension? And I think that, that should cause us to progress towards change. I think at the men's breakfast, you said, what was it? We're works of progress working towards progress. Yeah, I like that, by the way. I think that good line. Good stick in the brain.
Well, I think if you are never challenged by the Jesus that you follow, if you are never convicted by the Jesus that you follow, you're not following the real Jesus. I mean, that's the reality is, Jesus was not just grace, he was truth. And I give an example of this week. On Monday, I was doing my normal morning prayer time. And I always start my prayer time with, I start with praise and just praise God for who he is. Then I move to Thanksgiving and thank him for lots of different things going on in my life. And I started praising him. And all of a sudden I got this overwhelming sense of conviction about something in my life, about an attitude that I've developed that isn't Christ-like. I'm just going to be honest. And I really felt God talking to me, which doesn't happen all the time. I'm not one of those people that feels like that happens on a regular, obviously through the Bible and things like that, but just this overwhelming sense of something. Yep. But it felt like Jesus was saying, why are you wasting your praise on me? You need to repent. And in that moment, I spent the rest of that prayer time repenting and confessing of sin. I didn't go into the prayer with that intent. And that hasn't happened to me in months, but that should happen sometimes.
Yep.
Because Jesus does not agree with all of our opinions. And if he does, you're not worshiping Jesus, because we don't form him to our will, he forms us to his will. And that's what I would say, that where you ought to question the check engine light is, if that never happens to you, if you can hear a sermon and never go, I went to church and that was great, but you're never convicted or leave there going, what do I need to do differently? I think that really ought to cause you to question where you're at in your faith.
Yeah, I think the complacency is a dangerous thing. And I would say, too, because I think there's a difference between complacency and understanding how far we've come. And I think that was kind of what I was just thinking about as you were talking, of this difference in the attitude of, don't be okay with where you're at. Be okay with how far you've come, right? Look back at your life, see what God's done, but we should constantly be looking forward to what's the next step, what's my next goal, and I think, and again, that comes back, I have a quote that I picked up from one of my coaches years ago. I don't know where it comes from, but I've said it in sermons a few times, but it's that idea of choices make actions, actions make habits, habits make lifestyles. And so if we're going to really do this and pursue it, I think it is a constant motion of moving towards Christ. And Paul says it, and I talked about that a few weeks ago, but he says in Romans 12, like, if you're not moving towards Jesus, the harsh reality is you're moving away from Jesus. So there really is no, like, I think that's where comfort lies to us. It's like, there's this middle ground. It's like,
exactly
there is
what I
no
was,
middle ground.
Exactly what I was thinking when you were saying it is. You're either moving towards comfort or you're moving towards Jesus. It's almost never both at the same time.
Yeah.
So the sermon talked about how control is really an illusion. I think you've even said it today. In a world where we try to control everything, how does that reality impact our faith?
We feel like we can have control by doing certain things. Maybe that's staying healthy, eating right, exercising, having the right bank account, having the right retirement account, having the investments, does that make sense? We feel like we've insulated ourselves from bad things happening. And that is what's so dangerous about that particular idol is that works for most of us until it doesn't. In other words, when something happens and you lose control. I used the example on Sunday of just a recent thing that I saw, some people that I know that have been planning for retirement, and they had this plan, and they were, they're just a few weeks now out on that retirement. And one of them now has a very serious disease that has dramatically impacted their ability to live out that plan. The control they thought they had, and the control they've been planning for 15 years is suddenly gone. And if that's where you've tied your hope, then your hope is gone. And so we have to understand that our hope has to go deeper than that. Our hope has to be tied to heaven, because that's really the only thing that can't be taken away. Because right now, best my count is, time is, 100% on getting every one of us at some point. So no matter what we do, what steps we take, there will be a point in time where we won't be able to do the things we want to do. We won't be able to go the places we want to go. And ultimately, our health will fail us. And so that's the issue there.
Yeah, well, and I think we get that idea of feeling like we have so much time, too, that we, one of the things that I used to say this to my students when I was in student ministry, and forgive me for how old it's going to make you feel when I say it, but, at one point, the average age in America was like 75. I think it's a little higher now, but it's not much higher than that. And so that means for us, you and I are sitting here at 28, almost 29. We've lived a third of our life. Yeah. That should shock you and scare you a little bit,
It could be worse.
Could be. Actual grandpa.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things that helps break that illusion of control is understanding, like you said, time. It's mortality, like this reality that there's not infinite amounts of time, that this is a dark, twisted, broken world. And it's an imperfect world. And so anytime we try to find anything in that we're like, this is where I'm safe, I'm secure, history will tell you, scripture will tell you, your own personal life experience will tell you those things are going to fade. They're going to crumble. And when that happens, man, it ruins people when their hope is in something else, because they thought they built up this safeguard and it's gone, and I think, to me, I think that's one of the things that I think Jesus is so clear about is, the things of this world, they will pass away. James talks about life being like a vapor. Scripture is so evident to the reality that our world is temporary, that it's finite, that it pales in comparison to God and to eternity, and I think that's a big thing for us to remember.
Yeah, so we fix our eyes not on what is seen, in other words, what's all around us and that we can see and touch, but on what is unseen, because what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. And that's hope, right? That is the real hope, is to say, okay, things didn't go the way I thought they were going to here. I lost control. I lost my health. I lost my family. I lost my money. Whatever it is, if that's where your hope is tied, it's going to destroy you.
Yeah.
But if your hope is tied to eternity and that eternity with Jesus, then you bank on that promise that will never be taken away.
Yeah.
I think when the idea of control comes up, sometimes it can get twisted and people can kind of confuse control and responsibility. So how would you differ those two, responsibility and control?
Well, there's nothing wrong with planning and trying to control the things you can control. I mean, controlling all those things in and of themselves. There's nothing wrong with comfort. There's nothing wrong with approval. None of those are inherently bad until you make them an idol. And that's, to me, where control goes from being planning to an idolatry. Is it's okay to make sure you have, the right health, the right food, the right exercise, the right bank accounts, there's nothing wrong with having retirement planning. In fact, that's good and healthy. And the Bible's clear. That's even, that is Christian in thought process. But when that becomes more important than Jesus, that's when it becomes an idol. So, give you an example. I don't want to tithe because I got to save for retirement. That's an easy test. Yeah. When that you have now put retirement and those 12 hopeful years, right? If we retire at 65 and we die at 77, and I'm just doing the math, you've put all your hope in 12 years. And really, even if it works out, that's not much time.
Yeah.
But it may not work out that way, and you wind up losing control. So all of those things are good as long as they don't become where you put your hope and they don't become where you prioritize first. And so if all your time, effort, and energy is going to trying to make sure you're doing all the right things to try to live as long as you can or have as much money as you can, or then that becomes an idol.
Yeah. Well, and I would say know the difference between trusting God and doing nothing. I have a few friends that I know that they've struggled with that concept, even when we talk about like God's will or using wise discernment and things like their jobs. And they're like, so what am I supposed to do? Like just pray that God puts me in the right space. Like, that's stupid. Why would I do that when I, know that I can make wise decisions? And it was like, and I was like, and you're not wrong. I was like, I never said you need to stop making wise decisions, but you can still be prayerful about that and trust God in the process. But you still ultimately are making decisions in that moment. And I think about coming here for me, did I feel like ultimately this is where God was calling me? Yes, but I still made a decision to do that. I could have easily just been like, God, if it's going to happen, you're going to make it a sign. And it's like, no, I took the time to apply. I took the time to pray about it. I did the interviews. We flew in. Those were still decisions that I made. And I feel like God confirmed that through the process, but I think sometimes we look at giving up control as giving up action. I was like, and that is so counter to even, books like Proverbs talk about that idea that, that we're to be hard workers, but we're to be wise in how we live that out. And so can we give up all of our control and hope in the future for putting our hope in eternity? Yes. But we can make wise decisions in the moment. And I think that makes a big difference.
Yeah. I'm taking back to our Money Matters series, where we talked about, specifically the idea of finance, but, our responsibility in that. It's not that we're not to even think about it. It's that we have to give it to the Lord first. Mm-hmm. And it's this idea that, we're stewards of the resources we're given. And so, if that resource is your time, if that resource is, your family, if that, what have you, it's giving that priority to the Lord first. Mm-hmm. So it's not that, don't, like what you're saying, it's not completely check out, but it's, let the Lord be the priority in it first.
Yeah, and that's, to me, the beauty of the tithe. And I know there's always lots of discussion about whether, the tithe is just an Old Testament concept, is it a New Testament concept? But the beauty of the tithe is that idea of first fruits. Yeah. That before I do anything else, I'm giving to God. Mm. But it's not limited to money. That should be your time and your energy and your skills and your talents, all of that first to God, and then everything else falls into place. And that's how you haven't turned one of these other things into an idol, is if you're giving to God first.
Yeah. Let's see. Is there a time in your life that losing control actually led to something better?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've talked about this a lot. The biggest one for us is Lil's lupus. Yeah. That completely transformed our family. And so instead of getting physical healing that Lil wanted, I'm not going to go into great detail because we talked about that a couple of weeks ago, but that was in many respects the best thing that could have happened for us as a family, not because we want that, but because God used that to heal our family spiritually and emotionally and relationally.
Yeah, I talked about mine a few weeks ago too in a different episode. But moving to Texas was a big deal for us because Ann and I had made plans to to be in Georgia for a long time. I thought I was going to be in student ministry for a long time, and and putting down roots there. And we didn't even own our house a year before we moved. When we sold it. And so that was a big one for us, was kind of going, hey, I don't really know what God's going to do with this, but we're going to be obedient in that, and we're just going to have to let him take control in this, and it's been a huge blessing being here. But it was a leap of faith that went completely counter to everything we thought, the next, what has now been 3.5 years, what we thought we were going to be doing in 3.5 years is completely different from that. And I couldn't be more grateful for it.
Yeah. Something that I talk about sometimes is how I got into media ministry is I actually got a call from somewhere I had been a student intern at, and they had a position open for someone in their media ministry, and I had never done anything with video or anything multimedia, and they were like, hey, would you want to possibly do this? And then I was like, you know what? Yeah, that sounds like an interesting thing to get into, and found out I was going to be trained for about 2 weeks from a high school student. And then it was going to be all this media ministry was then mine, and so I got baptized by fire, as I like to say. And then 3 or 4 months later, COVID hit, and as many of you might remember, video became very important to the church during COVID, and so I actually ended up doing a lot of media ministry in that time, and it's just interesting to see how the Lord takes, the situation that I had no idea anything that I was doing, and the Lord, blessed me with gifts and people to be able to cultivate that. And now here I am, years later, still in media ministry and really, really enjoying it, and even doing a podcast now. So social media has completely changed how we seek approval and even measure success. How do we stay grounded in what really matters in a world that pushes these things?
Look for approval in the places that matter. And to me, that starts obviously with the approval of God. That is the most important thing that we can have, is to make sure that we are living, a Romans 12 life, what you preached about a couple of weeks ago, that this, being transformed by, the gift of the Holy Spirit that we have, looking for relationships in family, looking for relationships in friends. To me, the problem with social media is it really is another idol. It's something that gives us the illusion of something, but isn't real. And that's what idols to me are, is they're almost like the real thing, but different. And so social media gives the illusion of friendship. I have 1,347 friends. No, you don't. I have all this connectivity. No, you don't. You get to see little pictures of people's lives, the little parts they want you to see. But that's not community. That's not relationship. That's not really even approval. Yeah. And I think if that is, like so many things we flip upside down, the most important thing and put it on the bottom, and the least important thing, I would say that social media is way down towards the bottom of the list on where we want to find our affirmation and approval. Mm-hmm. And we'll trade the approval of God for the approval of, 800 likes or whatever. And that's just a messed up situation.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of components to this. I mean, obviously we're in what I would define as the digital age. You think about kids that are 2 and 3 know more about technology than, generations did when they were 30. That's a little scary. It's also exciting.
They definitely know more than Nathan.
Yeah, that's fair.
Everybody, 80-year-old people know more than Nathan.
But what I think happened, one of the things you talked about over COVID, was people developed a dependence on technology first. Social media was already a big deal at that point. We had been through, virality with things like Vine and YouTube. But really you saw a peak of that in COVID, right? Because everybody was tied to their screens. That's all there was to do. Yeah. You had, there was no social interaction outside of technology. And so what you ended up seeing is the rise of, what we call now the influencer, and this idea that anyone can become famous, anyone can become viral, whatever you want to call it. in a matter of seconds. And that's true. I mean, we see it all the time now where, it'll be some stupid video that somebody posts one time, or somebody interviews somebody one time, and now that person's making $15 million with millions of followers and all of this stuff. And so they get this idea in their head of like, that can be me. And so what I think ends up happening is we neglect that technology is a really good tool, and it becomes a lifeline. And so now it's like, this is the only way to succeed, is if I can succeed in this. And I think that's where you start to get where people are so obsessed with their likes, with their follows. And I mean, it's even easy for us if we're not careful. I mean, I keep track of our YouTube stats all the time because that's part of what I do. And, it's easy to sit there and go back and count and be like, all right, well, how many views did we get on the sermons? Like, did this one, like, what was the audience retention? How long did they actually listen to it for versus just clicking it? Did we really do that good? And so it's like, even in those instances, we get to where we're like, I need the approval. I need to track it. We need to be successful in this. And I think what we've neglected is that, things like technology and social media, I won't say they were created for. I know the reality that the industry, there's whole videos on what they were really created for, but what we think their goal is and what we can use them for is connection. And what we instead use them for is an attempt to find that success and approval. And I think we've missed the beauty of what technology can be, and instead created kind of this ugly monster of what it has become, if that makes sense.
Yeah. It is not really community.
No.
It is not really communication. And I think if you are viewing it as community and communication, man, you're missing the boat on social media. There are things it's good at. I mean, it is good at getting a message out. It is good at, at announcing things. It is good of, seeing pictures and, but it is not the place for real communication, because you just can't have that kind of discussion. You'll notice that I almost never post really deep, divisive issues. Things that I might say in a sermon, I won't post on social media because it's just not the format. Yeah. And you can see that even where you post something innocuous and suddenly in the comments, there are people that get crosswise with one another and are suddenly fighting about it. And you're like, this was just an innocuous, picture or innocuous comment. It's just not the place for that. But it's also not the place to find your self-worth and your value, because it is fickle and it is fleeting.
Mm-hmm. And ever-changing.
Yeah, well, fickle and fleeting, might be the best way to describe it. I mean, we're now on to, I know you don't even really know what YouTube Shorts are, right? Is that fair to say?
Is that not a Vine?
Kind of. It's like what TikTok was, and then Instagram took it over, and now YouTube is in it. So like TikTok is Gen Z, YouTube Shorts is Gen Alpha, which I know the fact that we're on Gen Alpha already is terrifying. But to me, that is a living, breathing example of when you talk about things that we put our hope in that fade and grow. If you like, I know somebody that was a Vine star. Ask me if anybody knows who they are now. That was 10 years ago. Zero. Couldn't even tell you the dude's name anymore. I've met him. I knew who he was married to at one point.
I'm still on MySpace, so I don't know.
Oh gosh,
I'm kidding. I don't really. I never had a MySpace.
But it is that example of. I think this is where people can make the mistake. Like, social media is not evil, and I think that's where we have to be careful, because I think that's, some churches take it so far as they're like, you got to stay off all this stuff. It's like, okay, well, if you neglect technology, I think it's why we're passionate about live stream. Yeah. We recognize
and technology. We've got lots of it around our church.
Sitting in front of microphones. I think if you neglect things like social media and technology and are like, well, we can't use them, there's nothing good that comes out of it. I don't think that's true. I think you miss a lot of what God can do with it. But again, we come back to when that's where our hope is, when that's all we're dependent on. Our goal. I don't know anybody that their goal should be to build some kind of online ministry overall, because realistically, their goal should be to minister to the people around them. That's great if you can help people, and I mean, Tristan, one of our students, is a great example of that to me. I know that he has a lot of resources that he likes to listen to and watch, and that's great. But I can tell you Tristan's hope isn't in those people, because I know where he runs when he's got questions. He runs straight to his pastors, and so if everything we do defaults back to social media or defaults back to online and technology, I think that to me is the big red flag. Like if that's where you have to run back to, something's wrong.
So how would you differentiate between a healthy desire for success and a feeling of a need to succeed?
Yeah, we're now talking about the power source idol and the desire for success. There's nothing wrong with being competitive and wanting to succeed at your job, succeed in family, succeed as a follower of Jesus. I mean, that is healthy and good. So those are good things. Those are healthy attitudes. Again, until it becomes more important than Jesus. So you succeeding at work is a good thing. But at the point where I skip church on Sundays on a regular basis because I need to go into the office because I want to get ahead, well, there you've made it an idol. Yeah. And so I would say just generally you go back to the same kind of criteria that you would use for anything else. If success becomes more important than your relationship with Jesus, then it becomes an idol. But success, you've also got to be careful about as far as making it the anchor for your hope. Because if you're anchoring your hope to success, number one, even while you're successful, you're not going to have peace and joy a lot of the time because you're worried about losing success. And I'm bad about that. I have, I joke, I said that on Sunday, I say it pretty regularly because it's true. I don't care that much about winning, but man, I sure hate to lose. It drives me, but if I'm not careful, it also plagues me. And so I worry about losing even when I'm winning. So I'm not even happy when things are going just the way I want them to. And then when things turn on me and I don't have the level of success, I realize the idol that I built because I begin to lose hope at that point.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Proverbs, I don't even know how many of them there are. It's well into the double digits. I mean, I couldn't give you an exact number off the top of my head. The amount of times that they talk about the value of hard work and what it looks like and the success in being diligent. One of them I know is hard work turns a profit. Mere talk leads to ruin and poverty. And it's just that idea.
It's a funny discussion in a podcast.
It really is, But I like the point that it makes of, we still back things up with action. We still back things up with hard work. And Joseph, Joseph, I don't know. My brain was blanking there for a second. It's always a good example of that to me. Daniel's another one. Look at what their life was not really the greatest circumstances at all times, but what's the one thing they were noted for is faithfulness to God. But then right behind that, they were hard workers.
And they were successful.
Yeah, very successful. They worked their way up. Joseph works his way up at one point to being second in command in Egypt. Daniel was a high-ranking government official.
In Babylon at one point in time.
And so I think sometimes that's where we get that idea of like Christian suffering, and like we take that even like into work, and it's like, okay, well, I don't really want that. It's like, no, like you can be a CEO and be a Christian. And if that's something you want to aspire for and work towards, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that, right? I mean, you're sitting here with somebody that owns a law firm. Like those things are not bad, and I agree with you. I think your point is, but when that's everything to us, when our life is defined by that and everything drives out of that, that should worry us. And I think that's true even for us as pastors. I know that's something that we struggle with. I know I do. We feel the need to succeed here. And I think there's almost that feeling at times of like, if we're working for a church plant, if the church plant were to fail in 2 years, does that mean that our ministry was a failure? And we know the answer is no, but there's always that little part of us inside that's like, well, that means that what we did didn't pan out. It's like, no, like we changed lives and we did, and so I think that same thing's true in our jobs. We can want to do good because Scripture says it's good to do good and hard work. Just don't make it everything about your life.
Well, when you sacrifice Jesus on the altar of success, that's where you've got a problem. I mean, I think about Daniel. You brought up Daniel, and he is a really good example of that because he is thriving in Babylon. I mean, everything is breaking his way. He is rising in power. And then the government says, don't pray to anybody or don't worship anybody but the king for 30 days. And I love the way the book of Daniel says that. It says then that, because he prayed towards Jerusalem, every day, I think 3 times a day. And it says that Daniel prayed like he always did. And that's where he made a decision. Okay, so I got success and I've got God. What am I going to do? And he chose God, knowing full well that it wouldn't potentially just cost him his success, but it would also potentially cost him his life. And that to me is that's the measuring stick, is if you had to pick, which would you pick?
Yeah. Well, and I think it's that reminder too of, again, you go back to when we were talking about control, that like how finite and short our life is. In 100 years, nobody's really going to ever talk about, the great work your law firm did, but that they will remember what we did and how we impacted their lives as followers of Christ, because that's what will echo into eternity. And I think that's something for all of us to remember too. I mean, it's a little different for us working in churches, obviously. But
I'm not even sure that it is really. I mean,
yeah. So yeah, if you know what I mean. I guess like no one's going to remember our sermons in 100 years, but
it is,
unless you're Charles or Spurgeon. That's a little different. But
you know what I'm saying? I think it's the same. Paul talks about the crowns of joy. He talks about the people that he led to Jesus as being his crowns of joy here on earth, but also his crowns of joy in heaven. I'm not sure anybody's going to celebrate my sermons in heaven. I don't even think I'm going to get to preach them. But I do think that I'm going to see people and go, hey, I played a little part in that. I played a little part in that. And I think that's the same for every Christian. And the calling is not different. We are all called to the Great Commission. We are all called to share our faith. And I think the only success that will last is, number one, our decision to follow Jesus, and then who we lead to Jesus. And maybe I'm wrong about that, but that feels like the eternal things that we're going to be impacted by 1,000 years from now is, did we follow Jesus, and did we lead other people to Jesus, and we get to see that joy in heaven?
Yeah. Well, I think that's absolutely true. I don't see anything in Scripture that would say otherwise to that. In fact, I see the opposite. I see that was Jesus's entire priority, and he pushed people to that. He constantly pushed people to focus on the eternal rather than the momentary circumstances. And I think that's where we get caught up. And I think sometimes we get frustrated too. I know that for a lot of people that I've talked to about that, like, they're like, yeah, I get it. I'm supposed to be the disciple maker, but how do I balance that with being an accountant or being, a nurse? And it's like, I understand what you're saying. And I'm not saying you have to quit your job and go be a missionary in China, but you have an opportunity every single day to impact people in your life. You have an opportunity every single day to make Jesus the priority over everything. And again, kind of going back to what we talked about earlier, I think it's just it's that daily choice every single day. Doesn't mean it's always going to be easy. Doesn't mean you always get it right. But I think, to me, this is where it's where the rubber meets the road. I think hope is one of those things that it is a practice for us. It does not come naturally to us. I think the reality is, by nature, we're pretty cynical, and so putting our hope in something eternal feels counter to what, it does. It's counter to what the world teaches us. Sometimes I think it's counter to the way that we naturally feel. But when we do that, I think it changes the game for us. But I think sometimes we just hope that, I don't know, say hope, we kind of pray.
Hope for hope.
Yeah, we hope for hope. We do. I guess that probably is the way I'm trying to say it. We hope for hope. We're like, if I just think about it one time, then I'll wake up tomorrow and I'm not going to worry about circumstances, And I think, to me, I think about all the stuff that you and Lil and like y'all's family has gone through this year. The amount of times I cannot imagine that you have to wake up every single day and go, I'm choosing to put my hope in things not of this world.
Well, even little things. And this is just a funny example, but we do this weird thing. You guys know this, obviously. We do the word for the year. I started that this year, and our word for the year is
creativity.
Yeah, so creativity. And then somehow visibility got added in almost unseeable.
It's very, slightly invisible visibility.
Yeah, on the screen. And then, 2 or 3 weeks ago, just being silly, I added survive is our word for the year. And I made a conscious decision this morning as I was doing our outline to take that off. It's a joke, but I need to move past survival and I need to grab hope. I need to preach hope to myself in a difficult time because it doesn't come naturally. And that's why we've got to preach it to ourselves. We've got to remind ourselves of the promises that God made, because that's in the end, that's where our hope needs to be anchored.
Yeah. Well, and what's crazy is like you hear it out loud and you're like, wow, how powerful is it that you could have that mindset? And it's like, do you not realize what he's saying? Like that was a little decision. That was hitting backspace on a keyboard. That practical application, we sit here and talk about it and you hear the power that something like that has. And I think that's true for us. You know, if you want,
you have to choose it.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's little, small, everyday decisions that lead to big change and lead to big impact. But I think sometimes we often think about it's like, well, what's the big change I got to make? It's like, have you started with the small things? Have you started with the small choices? Okay, well, start there. You'll work your way to big things, but every single day, choose to put your hope in Jesus. And I think that's the choose. And I can't remember, it's probably in your sermon multiple times, the word choose. And it's so often a word we overlook, but we have to make the choice to do it. It's not going to happen magically, but when we live it out practically, it makes all the difference.
Yeah. So how would you differentiate between Christian hope and cultural hope? And why does this difference matter to us?
It really is where your hope is found, because I think hope is a universal desire. I think, obviously hope is a big deal. Hope is something important for whether you're going through, PTSD from some traumatic event, or you're going through a fight with cancer or some other disease. Hope is a big part of how successful you're going to be in overcoming that and surviving that and thriving through that. So it's where you anchor your hope. And it's really less different than you might think for Christians and non-Christians, because for Christians, it's a decision: is my hope in Jesus or is my hope in comfort? Is it in control? Is it in power? Is it in affirmation or approval? It's the same thing for a non-Christian. At some point, they're going to decide, am I going to put my hope in Jesus, or am I going to keep putting my hope in these other things? And the problem with not following Jesus, you can follow Jesus and have some idols that don't disrupt your relationship with Jesus. They affect the depth of your relationship, but what does the Bible say? That you get into heaven like one escaping from the fire. If you're one of those people that that have put a lot of these idols up there, but still you get into heaven, ultimately you are going to end up with the hope of heaven, or the reward of heaven. The problem with a non-Christian who doesn't put their hope in Jesus is, even if they put their hope in success and they have all the success in the world 100 years from now, that's not going to matter. Yeah. And that, to me, it really is all, you said it earlier, and I think it's right. It's choice. Ultimately, the choice is ours. It is where, there is this, Jesus wants us. He chose us, but ultimately we have to choose him, if that makes sense. And that's really, that we do it every day. You do it one big time when you decide to follow Jesus, but then you still do it. As Christians, we do it I can get up today and I can say, I'm going to follow Jesus today, or I am going to follow success, or I'm going to follow power. Does that make sense? Or,
yeah.
Or comfort. And
yeah. Well, and I think that's, like I said, I'm not going to go back way into it again. I don't want to circle back, but it is, I think we try to make it this big mystical thing, and because we hear the word hope and it does kind of have a mysticism to it, but it's just going to be, it is a fight, I think, for us. And I think we just have to be okay with that and know that that's something that we do. We make the daily decision to choose. And Paul talked about it. He talks about it in the context of sin, but it's true for flesh versus spirit in Romans 7. It's a struggle. Like it is this constant fight back and forth of living like Jesus or living like the world. And I think that same thing is true for hope. It is going to be a constant struggle within us of either putting our hope in Jesus or putting our hope in the world. And so it's just going to come down to whether we want to do it or not. And I think that's it.
And I think what's so important for us to remember is it's a whole lot easier to anchor our hope to the right place when things are good than when the idol has failed. And so if your idol is comfort and you ride comfort out until it becomes really uncomfortable and that idol is completely gone, you're now struggling with hopelessness and a loss of joy and peace. And it's tough to reorient.
Yeah.
But, if you make a conscious decision while things are comfortable to make comfort less of a priority, if and when comfort fails you, you're not anchored there.
Yeah.
And I talked about that a little on Sunday, just some of those practical ideas. And I think that's the easiest one to have some practical steps is, if you want to make comfort less of an idol, make yourself a little less comfortable to follow Jesus. Make a conscious decision in some areas that I'm going to do this differently for Jesus. I'm going to give up some time. I'm going to give up some money. I'm going to give up some talents. I'm going to do some things differently to serve and honor Jesus. And you're moving your anchor from an idol back to the place it was supposed to be.
Yeah. Well, why would you want to play catch up when you can be ahead of the game? And I think that's, I kind of like, I love that you said it like that. I think we do. It's almost like we're like, okay, I'll make the change when stuff gets really bad. And it's like, and I can promise you
when I have no other choice.
When I have no other choice.
When I have no choice, I'll make the choice.
When there is no choice.
Well, it's like, if you go to the beach and, you see a sign that says, dangerous currents, caution.
And I totally ignore it.
And you go out and you're like, well, I'm going to, swim out. And then when it becomes a problem, I'll deal with it. It's too late. The warning is to keep you there. And I think that the same is true in this circumstance. The warning is put Jesus first so that when things fail, I mean, obviously that, what is it? John 16:16, I think, 16:16, that says in this world, you will have trouble, but take heart. I've overcome the world. It's a whole lot easier to put Jesus in charge before the thlipsis, or in the Greek word, or before that happens than it is when everything is falling apart. You can do it, but boy, as Christians, it's so much better to start when things are going well, make Jesus a priority so that when things fall apart, that's your anchor you hold on to.
All right. Good stuff. Hope in the Advent season. Big fan. So that's our time for today. We hope you'll join us again next week.
Look at you go.
As we dive into week 2 of our Advent series. If you have any questions you'd like to see in the podcast, you can email those to me at adam@chariscity.com, and they just might make it in the mix. Thanks again for joining us for the Closer Look podcast.
I hope people watch the podcast.